There was a time when if you were a party candidate and you were elected, it was understood that you could put the independent interest of your constituents first and foremost. It's actually a very modern invention, this idea of central control. The line to take is a phrase that wasn't heard in Westminster 20, 30 years ago. We have lost the independence of MPs because the power of the party has grown. Now, quite often when people talk about this, they say, oh, let's cope with the power of the vote, it's more free votes. That's all blah blah, that's treating the symptoms. The fundamental thing that explains the reason why people in Parliament behave the way they do is because their career trajectories are fundamentally determined by the party machine, because they answer inward. You've got a ridiculous situation where elected lawmakers get to decide who gets to be the elected lawmaker, because we've got this bogus system where 7 out of 10 seats are safe. If you change that, if you have outward accountability, if you've got to be re-adopted through an open primary, if you have a proper contest to sit in the House of Commons, then yeah, of course you listen to the whips, but you treat it, as they do in most grown-up legislatures, as advisory. And you follow the interest of the constituency first. So if you have open source politics and open source parties, every MP in effect becomes independent-minded. You know, unless you're actually in the cabinet, there was an idea in the past that collective responsibility did not extend to you, and I think we've lost sight of that. So, you know, you said that somehow open primaries mean you're going to have sort of, you know, you're actually more likely to have atypical people selected, because who gets to decide what is representative? Under the current system, it's the party elite who decides what's representative. Look at Gosport and Totnes, where we open it up, 16,000 people took part, and you've got very atypical women, I think one of them's a GP, you know, excellent candidates, because we democratised it. Democratising the process is good. David, your point about the cost of open primaries, the idea that we use taxpayer money for politics is wrong. We need open primaries, but we need to, at the same time, respect that parties are civic institutions. So rather than using taxpayer money to do it and getting the state involved, very simple. I introduced a 10-minute rule bill on this a few weeks ago. Allow local people and a political party that wants it to piggyback on pre-existing ballots. We've got local elections every 4 years, European elections every 4 years. Piggyback onto it, so that you petition your returning officer to hold the primary. You, the party that does it, then pays a few £100 for the incremental cost of the ballot paper that goes in, but it's entirely up to you. And if you're really happy with your choice of candidate locally, and you know, if it's a marginal seat and you get a real contest anyway, you may decide you don't want to do it. Leave it to local people to petition. So finally, you know, open primaries. The idea that, you know, an open primary is not an open primary if it is left only to registered supporters. An open primary is not an open primary if it is a caucus. And I hate it when Tories talk about there being open primaries when in fact they're closed caucuses or open caucuses. An open primary means letting everyone. There can be no abuse of crossover. Crossover is good, because if you're in a non-Tory area and you allow people to choose your candidate, they're much more likely to back that person on polling day. Open primaries are good. Closed primaries and caucuses are bad. And it invigorates membership. In Totnes and Gosport, the membership of the local parties today is higher than it's been in decades, because we've democratised it. Open primaries and getting rid of your monopoly in selection actually brings people into politics.
Thank you. I mean, the two are linked, aren't they? If you've got no party members, the pool from which you choose your candidate gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Polly, you agreed with quite a lot of what Douglas said.
But no, by no means all of it.
But not all of it. And open primaries was one of the things that you were questioning.
Well, let us get carried away about Gosport and Totnes. These were very, very carefully handpicked, three people handpicked by headquarters, pastors, absolutely kosher Tory candidates in every possible way. And if they find themselves a couple of you know, doctors are always particularly popular. If we know that doctors are at the top of popularity charts and politicians at the bottom, you're always going to do well if you choose a doctor, and you're always going to choose well if you do women, because women get a couple of percentage extra wherever they stand. You know, that's a plus too. But this was not some amazing, wild, wonderful form of freedom. This was Tory Central Office choosing three people. There you go. But as for an independence, I take up your point about the idea that we should have independents who will represent an area. Well, we are a really divided society, between rich, between poor, between right, between left, between Lib Dems. I elect somebody, I want to know what they stand for, who they support, who they back. I don't want to elect some sort of random person who kind of doesn't identify themselves as to which side of the divide they're on. I want to know all about them. It's very, very difficult to know about a particular candidate who doesn't have a party label. Most people know virtually nothing about who their local MP. Most people can't name their local MP. Most people know very, very little. You expect an extraordinary amount of citizen engagement to get people to find out about each individual candidate who is independent, talk to them about exactly what they stand for on a whole range of issues, as opposed to having a label stuck on them, which is on the whole, I think, in the end, more democratic, because you know what you're getting. And you don't know what you're getting with an independent whose face you might like, but then might turn out to have all sorts of weird views on things you never thought to ask. As for how rebellious people are or not, it's worth noting that this Labour administration since '97 has had more rebellions than any other since the war. More MPs have voted against their party than ever before. So it's a bit of a myth to say it's all got much worse. I mean, I think it's, as Douglas said, I think it's not good, but it hasn't got worse. Actually, they've rebelled like anything. That's the work of Philip Cowley, an academic who specialises in rebelliousness. On the paying for parties, it worries me a lot at the idea that we would allow it free. I mean, I think you'd have to have no spending in these primaries except what was agreed. The idea that, you know, an Ashcroft could move in and back a candidate, or some billionaire could stand and seize hold of a primary because they've got lots of money to simply swamp the area. You'd need some very restricted form of financing in which it was an absolutely level playing field, whichever way you did it. I always like the Power Commission's idea in general for financing parties, which is that at an election you would not only vote for the party of your choice, but you would tick a little box to say which party you wished your part of state funding to go to. So that you were in control of where state funding went. It didn't simply follow blindly whatever the last election had said.
Ben, you talked about increasing party membership. Anything you want to?
No, I mean, that was more of a kind of aspiration from an outsider rather than anyone with any kind of detailed knowledge. And you're right, politics has become much more single issue. It's become much more based around identity. You know, it's a rational decision to campaign for the things you want, but probably in the end, probably a more frustrating way of getting what you want in politics. How you get people more interested in parties, I think it's joining a party. I guess it's a mixture of whether you can think you can get something out of it, whether your particular MP is an independently minded MP or not, and also whether you can get any other benefits from doing it, and whether you can feel you can change. It would take a long time. It's all probably irreversible in that way, that, you know, getting the popular voice back into parties is a momentous task. So my kind of my dream of a kind of interwar kind of utopia of party fates and, you know, debates in town halls is probably over, I'm afraid to say. On the open primaries, it's interesting that the literature for this event had Hogarth's election series, which is a wonderful series of things. And you had all kind of the raucousness of an election campaign for sort of two hand-picked Whig MPs, I think, who are going to be elected, whatever. But you had the fun of the fair in between, so that's probably a lesson to us.
A free gin.
Yes, lots of gin, lots of cudgels.
Right, let's move on. Two gentlemen there, and then Tony.